everyone, I'm Chloe from Database Tycoon, and welcome to the third episode of Tycoon Talks, where we sit down with the founders, builders, and operators shaping the future of data. I'm here with Steven, our CEO at Database Tycoon, and we are so excited to be joined by Toby Mao, the co-founder and CTO of Tobiko. If you're new here, Database Tycoon helps organizations unlock the full power of their data by designing clean, modern data stacks that are actually easy to use and maintain. And Tobiko is a company that we deeply admire. They're on a mission to make data workflows simple, consistent, and scalable, empowering teams to ship reliable pipelines faster and with greater confidence. With the recent launch of Tobiko Cloud, they're bringing the structure and power of their open source foundation into an enterprise-ready platform built for real-world collaboration and scale. And so in this episode, we'll cover the mindset behind building open source products, how Tobiko is evolving to support production-grade, team-based workflows, opportunities in white space in the modern data ecosystem, common challenges and pitfalls data teams face, and a deep dive into Tobiko's tooling, vision, and what's next. And Toby brings a wealth of insight into all this. So let's jump in. So, Toby, can you kick us off by sharing Tobiko's origin story? How exactly did it all begin?
Sure. So before I started the company with my co-founders Yaroslav and Tyson, I worked at Airbnb, where I led the analytics platform. So that included things like Minerva, the metrics platform, and experimentation. So while I was there, I originally thought, well, maybe I should build a semantic layer as a company. But then I actually saw a demo of dbt from one of our teammates. And as I was looking at the demo, a lot of questions popped up, and I started asking them. I was like, well, I noticed that you just reran all of the models. How does that work? And the guy doing the demo was like, oh, well, that's just how you run dbt. You just rerun everything every single time. I was like, oh, no, that would never work at Airbnb, right? It's too much data. And then I asked him, what happens if I just want to run one day of data? Can I do that? And he said, well, no, you just kind of rerun everything every time. And so kind of that was my intro to the modern kind of transformation tools. And I was like, well, I think that we can do something that works at any company, right? At any scale, any company, using the kind of innovations that we have now. I think that we can do something at the next level. And so that's kind of where the idea of SQL Mesh came.
Awesome. And I guess maybe dive a bit more into what problem exactly were you trying to solve when you started Tobiko?
Sure, yeah, so Tobiko is building SQL Mesh, right? Modern transformation framework. And a couple different problems that we want to solve are, one, how can you create a data transformation platform that has modern data best practices and also, bring software engineering principles to data. And so first and foremost, right, SQL Mesh is created on top of SQL. SQL is another open source tool that I built that allows us to parse and understand SQL. So right now, as of this conversation, dbt has no understanding of SQL, right? It just takes Jinja strings, renders them, and then sends them to BigQuery or whatever. So dbt has no understanding of the SQL, and you can't detect basic syntax errors or anything like that, or do anything based off of your SQL. And so with SQL Mesh, we understand the SQL, we parse it, right? And thus we can do things like have no refs, right? We can just parse the dependencies and build a graph. And if you have syntax errors, we can detect that and show you that at compile time instead of having to wait for the data warehouse to tell you, right? Wasting time in compute. So that's kind of one aspect. The other aspect is not redoing previous work, and that requires state. As I kind of explained in the introduction, other tools don't understand what has been done and what needs to be done. You kind of just rerun everything, or you have to manually tell it what to do. It's very difficult and inefficient. SQL Mesh, on the other hand, was built with state from the beginning. And so it understands what has happened and exactly what needs to be done. And that's a very, very complicated process. So we wanted to build a tool that would give you all of this power of state and understanding of SQL, combine them together into the most efficient and powerful data transformation platform.
When you were coming up with the idea and running into those challenges of scaling with DBT that you mentioned, DBT itself has its own open source libraries and the code is open source. Did you ever have a moment where you considered trying to extend DBT or build onto it or modify it? Or did you just decide early on, I want to do this, as my own company?
Yeah, well, no, I never had that thought. Part of it is I had never used DBT, and none of my teammates or coworkers had ever used DBT. I pretty much assumed that the foundations of DBT, although are great, right, fantastic for the time, are very different from the vision that I had, right? I wanted to build the tool around SQL Glot, right? I wanted to have the tool have a first-class understanding of SQL, right? And additionally, I wanted state to be a first-class part of it. And so I think trying to extend DBT to do that would be a lot more work than it's worth.
What would you say Tobiko's mission is overall, and how does open source play into that?
I would say that Tobiko's kind of mission is to really up-level the state of data engineering, right? To really bring software engineering best practices to data, right? Like software engineers have enjoyed things like CI/CD, easy development environments, testing, syntax errors, compile time checks. They've had that for years, right? And today in the data world, we're still running Jinja code, right? Templates, having no syntax errors or compile time checking, very difficult to do development environments, having no state or understanding of what's happened and what needs to happen, right? Kind of data engineering is many, many years behind where software is. And so kind of our mission is to bring that to parity because we think that it's time for data engineers to enjoy the same luxuries as software engineers. And for open source, I mean, I don't know. Our team, myself, we're all really passionate about open source. I mean, all the data tools that we use at companies like Netflix and Airbnb are open source, right? We use a lot of Spark, Presto, Trino, etc., right? Data is kind of built on open source, and so we wanted to give back, right? We wanted any company to be able to get our powerful new tool without having to, like, I guess, pay or anything like that, because we believe that open source, especially with all these different proprietary warehouses, right, is needed in order to mesh them together. As an example, right, SQL Glot, right, the open source parser and transpiler that I built, is what it is today because of open source. There are so many databases that are not open source, and they all implement their own wacky syntax, right? BigQuery, Snowflake, Databricks, they all have, even though there's a SQL standard, there isn't really because everyone does their own thing. These warehouses or these companies aren't really motivated to have cross-compatibility. Why would they, right? If you are locked in, you're locked in. They don't want you to be able to switch. And SQL Glot was created so that you could understand SQL in any dialect and then transpile it to any other dialect. And through the contributions and through PRs and issues, SQL Glot has developed into a very, very powerful transpiler and parser, right? Because people had the opportunity to use it for free, to contribute issues, and to contribute PRs, it's grown and grown and grown naturally. SQL Mesh has that advantage of being open and free and getting a lot of people to contribute, develops that community and makes it better than if it were to just be proprietary.
Can you tell us a little bit about the release of Tobiko Cloud?
So we always wanted SQL Mesh to be a very powerful standalone tool that any company could use. But obviously, as a business, right, we still need to make money. And so we felt like Tobiko Cloud was a great way to make a business out of it. And so we wanted Tobiko Cloud to be something that gives enterprises and bigger companies the additional tools and capabilities that those enterprises need. Things like role-based access control, right, services, like running your infrastructure for you, right? And additional things like observability that make kind of running SQL Mesh in production operationally feasible and scalable.
I just want to jump in and kind of response to both of those points. I've been working as a consultant in data for a number of years now. For the past year, I've been running Database Tycoon and trying to grow that as an agency. And as part of my choice as a consultant, I get to recommend tools. And one of the reasons why I've been following Tobiko for a little while now is because I believe in open source code for a lot of reasons, but at a very practical level, it's very easy for me to explain to someone what the experience will be like of using a tool if their open source tool is available and it's easily comparable to the cloud tool. I spent some time with someone on your team last week getting my demo account set up. I want to start to explore the tool and see some of the features it has. And I kept seeing features and asking, oh, this must only be in the cloud, right? And I'd get the answer, no, it's actually part of core as well. My point being that I think it's a really great approach from my perspective of being in on the consulting side to have the open source tool available. There's so many other benefits to it as well. Like you said, the community outreach, you get feedback from the community and things like that. But I think about this sometimes with other vendors as well, where I'd like to be able to recommend their tool out, but I sometimes struggle to explain, what will your onboarding process be like in the cloud versus outside of it. So
yeah, and so onboarding from SQL Mesh Core to Tobiko Cloud is very easy, right? SQL Mesh already has a built-in scheduler and cron, right? Like every model has a concept of time, right? Unlike other tools that there's no concept of a cron, you kind of just rerun everything every time, right? With the upgrade, right, to cloud, there's no additional setup needed. You don't need to go into a complex UI and set up a bunch of DAGs and timers. It just works, right? Because each model already has a cron, the cloud scheduler of Tobiko just works. So the onboarding process from core to cloud is seamless.
And Toby, can you share a bit about where Tobiko is headed next and what is on the roadmap?
So in terms of open source, right, we're looking to build out a first-class VS Code extension. We think that as we've learned, that's where a lot of people like to be. And so we wanted to kind of make that a first-class experience. And additionally, we're looking to build out more integrations with LLMs and those kind of things, right? And so a couple of things there are, one, integration with VS Code from the LLM perspective for SQL Mesh, as well as using it to aid in migrations, right? So a lot of the people that come to SQL Mesh previously came from tools like dbt. And so helping them migrate easier is something that we're looking for. So we already are compatible with dbt, right? If you have a dbt project, you can use the SQL Mesh adapter to read in a dbt project and run that in SQL Mesh and get a lot of the benefits. But we find that a lot of people, most people, actually just want to migrate wholesale. They like our syntax more. They like our macros. They think it's cleaner. Instead of using the adapter, we're planning to kind of have a full migration toolkit to get a SQL Mesh native project. In terms of the cloud product, we're looking to really enhance the kind of role-based access control and security that we provide there. And so basically doing a lot around data governance, right? And making sure that you can run your data transformation in a secure and governed and documented way is kind of our focus in the cloud side of things.
Talk about the mindset around building open source. So first question here is, why do you think building in the open is important right now?
From my perspective, I think open source is important because, especially early on, it allows anybody to try your software and contribute to it. And when you're first starting out, right, it's very difficult to get people to use your stuff, especially if it's gated, right? And so I think one of the best ways to kind of gain initial traction and to grow and develop great product is through open source.
yeah, I'll just add on to that. When you open source something, and I haven't done this myself, but in the open source products I've worked with or seen, you start to see communities form around it. You find the people who are running into the same problems you are. You see things like, even if you're not a software developer yourself, if you're a user, you can open an issue on a project and you can start a conversation around something. And maybe 20 other people ran into this issue, but nobody reported it. But since you're reporting it, now you have started the process. When you're thinking about software that's not open source, you lose that aspect. And, instead you're relying on the team that puts it together, which can be very good or it can be very limiting at times. So as a user of open source, I've always appreciated that aspect of it. There's sort of a gathering aspect, a community aspect to it.
Yeah, and I think because it opens up who can use it, right? And who's willing to use it, it just makes the product better because the more users you have, the bigger the community is, the more you can improve the product, right? And other people can improve the product.
And specifically for Toby, but also for Steven, how do you balance speed, quality, and transparency in open source projects?
So for me, there's really only one mode, right? And the kind of culture that I'm trying to develop as the company is that we try to build really quickly. We frequently develop, and we try to be as transparent as possible. In terms of balance, as I said, I think I only have one mode, which is that we like to move fast, we like to iterate, and we like to be very transparent.
Is there a bigger strategy you have about open source, or are you just working towards keeping the product supported, making sure that the features are out? How do you approach your open source product development compared to your closed source products?
We're fully committed to open source. Aside from the business, right? I've been doing open source projects for my whole career. Besides SQL Cloud, I've also made an open source board gaming website, etc. And so I just have fun doing open source. But in terms of the business, I think open source is a natural funnel for us. And if we want to maintain that funnel, that inbound, it has to be good. It has to continue to improve and it has to be great. And so we are fully committed to maintaining our open source tools, SQL Mesh and SQL Cloud, to our best of our abilities. We've staffed full-time engineers on it, and as you can see in our Slack community, we are extremely responsive to all these open source users. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any other open source community with the type of support that we give in our public channel. Our kind of philosophy with how to balance that with enterprise, because obviously we are a business and we need to make money, right, to survive, is that we want SQL Mesh to be great, but Tobiko Cloud to be even better, to take it to the next level, right? As you start using SQL Mesh, naturally, because it doesn't have infrastructure, it's just an open source framework, it's going to have limitations, right? And so we want people to naturally graduate to cloud to get a better, more enterprise and robust experience. I think that the core and open source product will have a place, in many companies, that'll be just fine. But we do want the cloud product to have enough standalone value for people to want to pay us to use it.
This kind of pivots into my next section where we talk about opportunities in the ecosystem. What trends or gaps are you seeing in the modern data tooling space that open source is uniquely positioned to fill?
Maybe to zoom it out a little bit, taking the focus off open source, just in general, what gaps do you see in the modern data tooling space right now? What are some other tools, maybe even outside of the transformation layer, that you're interested in?
I think one of the biggest kind of areas that I think is maybe a problem or growing is that there's just so many small tools for everything. Like every single niche in data has a company or a tool. And so there's like a lot of sprawl in the modern data stack. Like if you look at those charts or the graphs that the VCs show of all the different segments and all the companies, it's massive. I think that there's going to be a little bit of fatigue there, and with the market climate changing, smaller companies will die out or get acquired, and so there's going to be inevitable consolidation. And so I think maybe that's probably the biggest area of change that I see happening.
And I'm curious, though, how do you see that affecting your own business? Because, if I wanted to ingest data and transform it. I wouldn't be able to do all of that right now with just SQL Mesh. Or maybe I could. Correct me if
Actually, you
I'm wrong.
can, right? So SQL Mesh actually has first-class Python models. And so within a Python model, you can actually do whatever you want. You can hit APIs, you can do anything. And so you can actually ingest data with SQL Mesh. And so we've seen actually folks using SQL Mesh to ingest data. Now, I'm not saying it's the best tool for that, but at certain scales, that does make sense.
Got it. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that the tools that are going to do the best in this space are the ones that will say, here's what we specialize in, but here's how you can easily do the other things we know you need to do in the data space. So things like integrations with other tools, I'm sure help with this. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's something you've thought about on your side as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that brings us into our tooling deep dive. So speaking of like specific tools outside of the Tobiko ecosystem, what tools are you excited about right now?
These kind of days, I don't code quite as much, but the big trend, I think, is LLMs and AI, right? And so I think in terms of dev tools and productivity, that's kind of the big talking point. I honestly, personally, haven't really used them that much myself, but I've seen a lot of my teammates use them and really enjoy them. And folks that I really respect are saying that they're able to gain huge amounts in productivity and learning kind of how to use these tools to change their workflows. And so I think that's obviously probably one of the biggest changes and interesting areas in dev tooling, et cetera.
You mentioned, some of the roadmap features you're looking at in addition to doing a VS Code extension,
Yeah.
potentially having some LLM support. I can say as a user, I'd be very excited about that. I think there's a lot of people who would certainly use it. That's just one of those things where, as you mentioned, LLMs seem to be the big topic right now. There's still a lot to be determined when it comes to where will the code be written and how will it be written, and even what's the quality of that. So any kind of first party solution that says this is our LLM, we give our blessing to this, I think that's going to be very appealing for the market.
Right. So personally, I don't believe that we're anywhere near replacing data engineers or anything like that. But what I do believe is that these kind of LLM tools can be used to help data engineers. And so our company is really focused on enabling and improving the lives of data engineers. And whatever infrastructure we can build to assist them there is something that we'll be investing in.
And now I want to chat about like how is your thinking around what makes a great data tool evolved?
I think one of the most important things with succeeding in the data space is velocity and how quickly you can iterate, because data changes all the time.
I'll jump in with an answer as well. I've noticed the trend you brought up as well, Toby, that there's a lot of tools out there now. And not only are there a lot of categories, but there are a lot of tools in those categories. And I think any tool that can win the UI battle will do very well. If you can quickly adapt from a user experience in your local environment to a similar experience in the cloud. Actually, another thing I wanted to mention that I thought was great was how easy it was to connect. I tried the T-Cloud command line, and I was able to connect that very easily to the UI, and I was able to see how something happening in the command line affected the web connection. So, things like that I think make a big difference. And I think that tools that are constantly thinking about how is my user actually interacting with this? Are they having a good experience or not? I think they're going to do very well.
I think a big part of that is like, one, being receptive to feedback, but two, also having empathy for the user. Data platform engineering, so like building tools for data people, I think is a very interesting niche in the software engineering world, right? Because it takes a certain type of engineer, one with very unique experience to build that. Because you can't just put like a traditional data engineer on that, because they know how to write Spark jobs, but they never build a web service, right? And you can't just put a software engineer on it because they know how to make a web service, but they have no idea what a BigQuery job is or how to write SQL. Building data platforms requires that special blend of like, you are a software engineer with the ability to create infrastructure and scalable web apps, but you have to have the empathy and the knowledge of data engineering so that you know exactly how your products are being used. One of the challenges of building a data transformation platform is the necessary skills are very hard to come across.
When you say the necessary skills, you mean finding that right person who's the right
That's right.
target for this tool? Yeah.
Right. For finding the right people who can, have the software skills to build out the tools and the data engineering skills to have the empathy and the product mindset to build the right tools.
And so I'm curious, where are you finding those users? How has that process gone for you? Let's say you're in a sales call or something and you start to have a conversation. How do you know, oh, this is going to be a great candidate for SQL Mesh?
Oh, so I was mostly talking about hiring, right? So to build the platform,
Oh.
right, you need that certain blend. But in terms of using the product, right, that can just be data engineers. You don't have to be a data platform engineer to use SQL Mesh.
Oh, I see. Okay.
To answer your question, like when we're on a sales call or whatever, if people understand kind of what we're preaching, they're like, oh, true CI/CD, blue-green deployments, or I love the fact that you can figure out the dependencies automatically or figure out breaking, non-breaking changes. Data engineers who have a strong mindset of like DevOps and data ops and efficiency and those kind of things are great fits for SQL Mesh because they instantly latch on and they can kind of see the beauty of the design decisions that we've made.
Got it. So from your perspective, it's about making sure that these features are noticed and seen and used. It sounds like there's a lot of care being placed into the user interface and the interaction. And if you can find a user who really locks into that, that's a good user for your product.
Yeah, we've put in a lot of thought into developing SQL Mesh, and some would say that is opinionated. And yes, I think it is opinionated, but for good reason, right? The founding team of Tobiko has data engineering experience from some of the largest and biggest data companies in the world. As I said, we wanted to build a tool that could work at any company, and we really mean any company. And so in order to do those things, we think that you need to do things in certain ways, right? Like understanding time, having state, right? Making sure that when you do things that they're intended, right? That's where the whole plan apply concept came in. We introduced a lot of these concepts and this kind of opinion way of doing things because we do believe that it is a very powerful way to do data.
No, makes sense. There's nothing wrong with being opinionated, especially in a crowded market.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone who was in your shoes looking to launch or contribute to a project today?
Just go for it. I mean, I would find something that you're interested in and have the abilities to do. But even if you're not that technical, you can always contribute, right? You can fix typos or documentation just to get started. Find a project that you're interested in. That always helps, right? It's always more fun when you're having fun. And two, finding a project that is responsive and receptive to contributions, right? You don't want to get in a situation where you spend all this time making a PR for it to be ignored for months or maybe years or never get merged, right? I think with all of our projects, SQL Cloud and SQL Mesh, we're extremely responsive. We understand how difficult it is and how much effort it takes for a contributor to make a PR or even an issue. And so every PR and every issue that we receive, we take very seriously, right? We make sure that it gets in, or if not, we give you the feedback about why we're not going to do it. But yeah, to answer your questions, find the project that you care about that's going to take in your work and just go for it.
So if somebody watching wants to contribute to SQL Mesh or SQL Glot, how do you recommend they get started? Is there a contributor's guide?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty basic. You find an issue, or if you know what you want to do, you do it. I would suggest that anything big or controversial, you should definitely go into our Slack community and ask us about it and talk to us first, right? Rather than just spending 7 days by yourself doing something, right? And so, yeah, figure out what you want to do, discuss it, get alignment, build it, test it, and then, yeah, work with us to get it merged.
Sounds good.
So now I will bring Paul from Tobiko. He's the partnerships manager. And Chisholm, who is the lead engineer here at Database Tycoon, they're in the audience. So I will bring them up for a Q&A if they have any questions they would like to ask you guys.
Really interesting conversation. I had a question when you were talking about open source. This for either Steven or Toby. I know that one of the concerns that people have around open source, most businesses, is privacy. So how do you solve that, or have you been able to solve that, Toby, with Tobiko?
So what do you mean that the concerns with open source are privacy?
So open source tools, the idea is that the code is open source, the code behind the back end of it. And so it is susceptible to maybe hackers or something because they understand what has been done to create that tool, right? As opposed to the one where we cannot see the source code of that particular product. So yeah.
I see. Okay. Well, I would say that a lot of it is actually the opposite, right? Which is because it's open, people can submit or report issues much more quickly than with a closed source tool, right? And so you see that all the time with good hackers, right? And that's why people have like bug bounties and all those kind of things. I think that having things in the open helps with that as well because you can inspect it. So let's say I want to use a tool and it's completely proprietary. I have no idea what's in there. It could be mining Bitcoin for all I know. I have no idea. But if it's open source, I can look at the code. I mean, I probably won't, but I could, and I can look at every single line of code and make sure that there's no Bitcoin mining in there. And so I think that if you are very security minded, I think open source can actually help there as long as you're diligent because you actually have the ability to look at things and figure out exactly what's in it.
Chisholm, I want to answer a slightly different question from the one you answered, which is when I think of open source and security and privacy, the first thing that comes to my mind is hosting, because when you have to host a platform like this, you now open yourself up to so many security risks depending on how you do it. My short answer to your question is when I think about how do I handle open source tools privacy, Tobiko Cloud in one way is the answer. Like I would like to be able to not have to tell my clients that they now need to become security experts. You know, if there is a pipeline that I can say, you know, this is where I think that the line gets drawn between open source and proprietary code, and where I think that, you know, Tobiko Cloud is doing an excellent job, is that people who want to spend their time in these development tools, they enjoy spending the time on those problems for the most part, I think. Like they want to spend their time doing analytics engineering. They just don't necessarily want to become an expert at hosting or deploying or even orchestrating. Or, you know, there's so many pieces of software development where one aspect of this is that we're bridging the two worlds, but there's another aspect of it, which is there are a lot of people in data who really just would like to stay focused on data. And the more that can be abstracted away into tools like Tobiko Cloud and others as well, you know, there are plenty of other companies doing this. I think that really simplifies the question for a lot of data people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm curious how you guys see the data engineering profession evolve here in the next few years. We talked a little bit about, you know, kind of some potentials around the AI side, but just as a core profession, right? It's obviously changed a lot in the last few years, being, you know, pulled more towards the business. Curious how you guys see that kind of advancing in the next few years.
I think that these things happen in waves, right? I think that right now we're probably in a phase where people are looking to get a little bit closer to the business, maybe less expensive data engineers and more analysts, right? But I think over time, as we shift a little bit too far down that end, I think people will realize that in order to kind of have robust data, that you're going to need more of these data engineering professionals, right? And so I think that is kind of a wave or something of going back and forth between those two. So I think the data engineer will become more prevalent. I mean, in terms of like AI and stuff like that, I think that due to the value of AI and the potential there, that just means that data becomes more important, right? Because if you want to get in that space, you need to have good data, right? You need to have good data to get good models. And so having more robust, correct pipelines that are timely, right, and can be rapidly iterated on is more and more important.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I mean, I don't think the engineering profession or the software engineering role is going anywhere or data engineering or anything like that. I think those roles may change and come together as efficiency increases. I could see there being more of a combination of a analytics engineer and an analyst who's more business facing, or maybe someone who's a data engineer and I don't know. There's probably other combinations that can happen, but I think that anyone who is betting on the LLMs right now is just betting on an uncertain future. And I'm somewhat expecting to start getting calls in like a year from now or 2 years from now of legacy tech debt Gemini 3.7 code that nobody understands anymore. And so I just think that there's a lot of problems that businesses still have, and we're not going to solve them by having less people at the table and more technology. I think that we need to continue trying to solve the problems that exist now and use tools like LLMs to improve our workflows. I see it as like a workflow enhancement tool more so than a replacement or a death knell for the future of engineering.
Awesome. Thank you both.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was such an incredible conversation. But before we wrap, Toby, so where are the places that if people want to, contribute to SQL, if they want to keep up with what Tobiko is doing, like where are the best places for people to keep up?
Sure, we have a growing Slack community at tobicodata.com/. You can check us out on GitHub or go to our website, sqlmesh.com or tobicodata.com.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And if you want to keep up with Database Tycoon, our LinkedIn is linked below and our websites. And thank you guys so much. We will see you on the next episode of Tycoon Talks.
Thank you.
Thanks.